Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4146. Today's date is July 8, 2026. It's been almost like a night at 10:33 p.m. All right. Well, basically, uh, there is a couple of things that I wanted to say. Okay. So I was kind of like watching a news regarding about that. Um, okay. First of all, is that I live in India, and in India we have a monsoon. By the way, a monsoon where kind of like the rain is actually happen, which is really good. By the way, because of this monsoon, we are kind of like a much more fertile country and things and that. Okay. Now, every year when the monsoon came, the financial district or financial capital city of India is a Bombay, is went into the flood. Every time rain came, the Bombay or Mumbai is kind of like a sink into under the water. Why is that? Because of like a lot of things, like basically this thing na, if I'm kind of like a say this thing that key, one of the biggest mismanagement kind of like assembly system, if you wanted to think, then you kind of like a look into the kind of like a uh, look into the Bombay, because this city has so much amount of money, so wealthy people are actually live in Bombay, but the management in the Bombay is just so crazy, so stupid, that literally sometimes I just feel like that na, like every year we are kind of like a scene that ki Bombay is actually got flooded and things and that every year, like a kind of like a same story every year. Okay, I don't know, when I was kind of like a listening this thing every year, kind of like a Bombay is kind of like a sink under the water and things and that. So I was kind of like a very much kind of like a things, I don't know what is actually the reason. So I went to YouTube. I kind of like a like basically it's this thing that I got a kind of like a watching the news. Okay, and in the news they kind of like didn't really properly mention that why the flood actually happened and things and that. I went to YouTube, search for that why does Bombay always get flooded. It kind of like a pop up with the video. I watched the video, and the particular person who kind of like make that video kind of like providing all the legit evidence and things and that. So first of all is that Bombay is governed by, like basically every kind of like a city same as a Bombay has a kind of like a run by municipality. Okay, yeah. In a Bombay has a Bahu Mumbai Mahanagar Palika, which control the entire thing on the Bombay, like a where the road made, like a the kind of like a distribution, connection, road network, rail network, airport, everything is kind of like controlled by BMC, Bahu Mumbai Mahanagar Palika, BMC. Okay, yeah. Now BMC is a kind of like an agency, by the way. Okay, it's not agency, it's a kind of like assembly organization. Okay, where who control the every department controls something. So one of the biggest problem is that in the BMC there is no kind of like a leader to kind of like a take authority. Like what exactly happened in the BMC or not in the BMC, like basically right now I am not kind of like a provide you the exact information regarding about what is actually is this that particular person says. Like if you wanted to understand, search about the YouTube why does Bombay flood every single year, when the rain actually happened, you will kind of like a pop up the kind of like every video. The I will kind of like a jump into the direct thing. Okay, no one is actually responsible for that. What exactly is this thing? When it's okay, let me kind of like explain to you in very simple language. Let's just say a kind of like you are living in house. Okay, yeah, and your house roof is a kind of like a leaking. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing that you are kind of like a say, dude, like you are kind of like a went to the builder or whoever the particular person who kind of like build that house, say this thing that my roof is a leaking. Now basically is this thing, the particular person who kind of like a you told this particular person is a kind of like a somebody only own the roof. Like basically, if there is a problem in the roof, they will kind of like fix it. Okay, yeah. Now, and basically, what does they say? I will kind of like fix your roof, but there is a wiring in between. So you need a kind of like a permission from the wire minister or kind of like electrician to kind of like I will kind of like do this thing. So basically, then you kind of like went into the electrician, say this thing that there is a kind of like a roof is actually leaking, and in the roof there is a kind of like a wire. So they kind of like say, roof people kind of like say this thing that they will kind of like fix it until you kind of like give the permission to kind of like mess with the electrical system and things and that and that. Then electrician people will gonna say, how do we supposed to approve this thing? Because it's not really possible. Kind of like if I kind of like approve this thing, they might kind of like messed up and things and that and that. So basically they want kind of like approval from the roof people that if something went wrong, then they will kind of like give the written agreement and things and that and that. Then you went to kind of like roof people to the electrician, kind of like a back and forth, and roof is never gonna fix it. Okay, yeah. So this is what exactly that house represent as a kind of like a Bombay. The people who are living in that house is a citizen of the Bombay. And everything inside that house, like a roof, wall, electric, lamp, surface, tiles, everything is actually owned by different agency. Okay, yeah. And they are not kind of like simply responsible for what is actually happening in the entire house. No, they will kind of like make sure they will kind of like fix the roof. They will fix the roof. If the kind of like something happened with the wall, they will kind of like fix the wall. Like basically every particular department is a kind of like a controlling one specific structure of the kind of like assembly house, and that's it. They will not gonna touch it. And if they wanted to touch it, they want to approval from another kind of like a things, and they will kind of like say, if you messed up, then kind of like assembly give me the approval that something happened, it actually happened because of you, and they will not gonna accept this thing. So it is a kind of like a back and forth conversation, and nothing is actually fixed. The roof is a kind of like a leaking all the time. Okay, and this is a kind of like a Bombay situation. Like no one is kind of like authority, no one is actually taking the responsibility of the entire house. No, just everyone kind of like taking a responsibility of part of house. Like I will kind of like control the roof, I will control the wall, I will control the electric, I will control the kind of like a carpet, I will control the tiles, I will control the water. That's it. There is no authority person who kind of control all the body, all the agency. No one is actually exist. And because of this thing, the kind of like the work is never been happened. There is no kind of like a responsible person who kind of like take a blame or authority, nothing like that at all, because everyone kind of like passing the blame from one to another and things are not in that. And because of this actually happened, it's just so shit. That's why kind of like a Bombay is actually flood every single time when the monsoon came. Bombay just sink into inside the kind of like a water. And by the way, let me tell you one thing. If you are thinking that ki less amount of fund, no dude, literally let me tell you one thing. The Bahu Mumbai Mahanagar Palika, they have kind of like so much amount of money that they could supposed to be kind of like make the Bombay as a kind of like a Singapore. Yeah, literally they have that much amount of money. Oh yeah, like 80,000 crore rupees. That's almost like I don't know about this thing. I usually talk about the millions and billions, but this is kind of like a very big amount of money, like a really big amount of money. Okay, so even if that much amount of money, they are kind of like doing very stupid thing. They don't really have any kind of like authority body. They don't really have any things. And I'm kind of like telling you from kind of like somebody just a upper layer point of perspective. In the inside, there is a kind of like there is no corruption actually happened, but the mismanagement and there is no one is kind of like taking the responsible of like a right and things and that just completely fucked up and shit and that. There is so many kind of like a wrong stuff inside the house, inside the kind of like a Bombay, in just like, yeah. And when I'm watching that documentary, I was feel like that, dude, like this is actually happened in 2026. Like basically India is a kind of like a growing economy. We have a lot of amount of fund and things and that. Bombay is a kind of like a financial capital. There is a kind of like a lot of amount of wealth is actually generated by the Bombay. There is a kind of like a film industry over there, financial capital over there, like a basically stocks market is actually over there too. Like so much amount of money is actually over there in that city. And why does kind of like those people are they are kind of like the city is a kind of like a very, yeah, just like so stupid, yeah, dude. Like Bombay is a kind of like a things like I went to Bombay and kind of like I feel like that na ki, like I went to Bombay just couple of time, okay, but I didn't really stay there for longer period of time, so I didn't really experience the Bombay. But one thing I kind of like experienced that ki the Bombay is kind of like a bit more humid. Like whenever you go, you will kind of like experience a kind of like a rain, summer, and probably very less winter. Like might be kind of like some places thing that you might gonna experience winter in kind of like a November and December. That's it, November and December. Probably little bit in kind of like a January. Yeah, that's it. Okay, yeah. Rain is actually you could kind of like experience maybe kind of like a July and kind of like a August and September. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing just three months? Okay, that means 6 months, and rest of the 6 months are kind of like a just summer. Yeah, literally, yeah. Like a kind of, and also is this thing, not the nominal temperature of the kind of like a Bombay, it kind of like a feels like 38-36 degrees Celsius, but it feels like kind of like a 40-45 because you are kind of like a sweating all the time because it's kind of like a so humid because of the kind of like it's a coastal city. There is a kind of a lot of kind of like a humid is actually there from kind of like Indian Ocean and things and that, so it's very humid. Okay, yeah. Like you don't know where the kind of like a sweat come from. It is that much kind of like a things. And also the people, oh my god, like I went to the Bombay, there are so many people. Like I like basically is this thing na ki I'm not used to with the kind of like a seeing that many people, and I'm kind of like a really scared of seeing that many people, like a legit shit dude, like dude, what the fuck is that? Okay, yeah. When I see the kind of like a local train and people are kind of like basically this thing now, I usually when I see so many people are kind of like somebody this thing, like most of people kind of like say it's a Bombay spirit and things and that and stuff like that. I don't know, yeah. Like I don't really feel like that it's a kind of like a Bombay spirit and things. Like basically, why are you kind of like a proud of something that kind of like a things? Like a population is not a kind of like a problem, but it is a problem, dude. Like basically Bombay is a kind of like such a city where kind of like a hundreds of millions of people are kind of like a live, like almost like a in the population density. This is a kind of like one of the dense city on the planet. Yeah, and I'm not even talk about the kind of like a Andheri. Sorry, not Andheri. Like a Dharavi. Dharavi is a kind of like one of the biggest slum in India, which is actually inside the Bombay, which is like a, oh my god. And there are almost like a millions of people actually live in that particular kind of like a in 1 kilometer square feet area, 1 kilometer kind of like a square feet area on that Dharavi. 1 kilometer, I'm not really sure, maybe kind of like a 4 or 5 kilometer, but almost like millions of people actually live in that there. It is too much. Like I don't know, yeah. Like basically, why am I kind of like a talking about this thing, artifact? Like it's like that, na ki when I okay, like I live in Bombay. I love my country, by the way. Okay, I love my country, and when I kind of like somebody the kind of like a listen something or seen something that like that, na, like I was kind of like a thing that ki we are so fucked, dude. We are so fucked. Like basically, why does people are kind of like a so stupid and things? Why like basically is this thing? Na, there are like India is such a country where kind of like a so much amount of people and every people have kind of like a things very differently, and most of people actually think not so good differently. Like I don't know. Yeah. Well, let me pause here. I have to do a susu. Okay, let me pause here. All right. Now I feel really good. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Like we will not gonna talk about this kind of like a some little stuff and stuff which is not really right. Let's just jump into the question. All right. Yeah. Let's go. All right. So question is, will user avoid the real therapy? Oh. Okay, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? I wanted to build an application called My Artifact. What exactly is this application? When you write the diary every single day, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you want it to. The reason is that your thought process are actually much more faster than your writing speed. Your writing speed is actually slow is because of you need a pen, you need a paper, you need a convenience, and even after that you need to put lot of amount of effort to write the diary. What if instead of writing a diary, what if you could record a diary, like a audio record a diary? The stuff that you are kind of like listening right now, this is my audio diary. I called it My Artifact, episode number 4140 something. I am doing this thing for past 11 year. I am doing this thing every single day. Because of writing a diary is a self-reflection process, so as a recording a diary, so as a recording artifact is a self-reflection process. It adds so much amount of value inside of me. The person that I became today and person that I will become tomorrow, it is all because of artifact. The amount of value it add inside of me, I wanted to share this value. How do I supposed to do that? By building an application. My application is somewhat something like a YouTube platform. In a YouTube, you kind of like upload your video, other people kind of like sees your video. Same thing, you kind of like record your artifact, upload your artifact in artifact platform, other people kind of like listen your artifact. There is only one catch, is that no one knows your real name. Your real name is always kept hidden. Like my real name is Saurabh Avthare, but my artifact handle name would be Prozac 1943 or something else. Before I wanted to build this application, I wanted to aware of all the possible consequences, specifically worst possible consequences. I went to ChatGPT, I tell my app idea, tell him that he suggests me almost like hundreds of possible consequences in question format. ChatGPT kind of like suggests me hundreds of all the worst possible consequences will gonna happen in question format, and this is one of those questions. Now regarding about this question, it question says, will user avoid the therapy? Okay, yeah. Now let me tell you one thing. When the user will kind of like record the artifact, recording artifact is a kind of like a self-reflection process. Okay, yeah. And because of this thing, you might not need a kind of like a therapy. But before I wanted to kind of like give any kind of like a answer, I wanted to understand regarding about therapy. I wanted to understand regarding about what exactly artifact does. Now, I am really experienced regarding about what does exactly artifact do, because I'm doing this artifact for past 11 years, and basically this thing, my mental condition is a kind of like a somewhat something like good. Like, okay, let me tell you one thing. If you're not really understanding the context, let me explain. I'm 33-year-old. I am living with my parents. I am not earning any money. Like basically is this thing from visual point of perspective, I am kind of like a sound so pathetic, right? And because of this thing, I might need a kind of like a lot of amount of stress and things and that and that. Okay. But actually I am not in the stress. I am kind of like a really good. I'm kind of like a thinking about something that I believe that I could able to do this, and I'm doing this thing. I've been through so many failure. I fail so much. I am still consider myself still a failure too, because there is a kind of like a lot of kind of like a fucked up shit is actually happened with me. Okay, yeah. And because of this thing, I should supposed to be kind of like a face lot of kind of like a stress and things and that and that. I did kind of like experience stress. I feel something that sometimes I kind of like a feel like pathetic loser and things and that and that. But when I record the artifact, I just kind of like a blunt it out. Let me tell you something what is actually happened, at least from my point of perspective, because I am not a therapist or I never really been on therapy, so I'm not really sure about what is actually happened in the therapy. Okay, yeah. So I will gonna tell you. Okay, yeah. So basically what is actually happened that like, okay, I sometime I kind of like experience like a really worse, like a super worse, that I kind of like a feel like that like there is nothing really at all. Okay, there are so many kind of like a things happen in my life that I kind of like a suddenly feel like that I should supposed to be end up my life and things and that, and because there is nothing really left to kind of like a suddenly live the life and things. I'm not telling my sad story and things and that and that. I'm just kind of like telling that how kind of like I've been through worse situation, but still my worst situation is not that much worse situation as compared to other people kind of like a face that many things and that and that. But there is a one good thing that kind of like only happened inside of me, is that I'm recording artifact. Imagine as a kind of like a cooker. Okay, yeah. A kind of like a cooker, like, do you understand cooker na? It's a kind of like a kitchen cooker. Okay, yeah, you put something and kind of like a put the water, because of you turn on the gas, water vapor kind of like a water converted into the vapor, and that vapor is a kind of like a created pressure, and because of that pressure anything that you put, it kind of like cook very fastly, very like very quickly as compared to conventional way of cooking, because cooker is a kind of like a cooking by kind of like a creating pressure inside. Okay, yeah. And because of this thing, kind of like a entire kind of like a whatever the kind of like a rice or kind of like a dal will kind of like a cook. Same thing happened with the humans. Okay, because of we are kind of like a living the life, we have kind of like a basically kind of like a get so much amount of stress. Now how does we kind of like a getting so much amount of stress? Because of we are social animal. Every person have a kind of like a some sort of expectations, or every person kind of like a expect something from someone. Okay, yeah. And because of we are kind of like a expecting some sort of expectation, and when most of the time we are not complete that expectation, we consider kind of like a failure and things and that one thing. Another thing, every person kind of like a went through kind of like a so many kind of like a been relationship, or kind of like a so many toxic things and that. And most of the people are kind of like a absorb that thing, because there is no kind of like a option at all. Okay, nothing at all, because like basically no one is kind of like a somebody say there that we could supposed to be kind of like a somebody talk and things and that. We are kind of like a living a such a life, we are kind of like a we are kind of like a surrounded by so many humans, but we cannot able to be share our pain to that particular person, because like basically they might think that ki I am kind of like a vulnerable and things and that. And because of this thing, as a kind of like a particular person who kind of like been into the stress, they never really told their parents or kind of like a no one. Probably their significant other is a kind of like only one particular person, that though that particular person might gonna share everything, but still significant other might not gonna kind of like listen you every single day that what exactly happened and things and that. So basically whatever the stress that we are kind of like collecting every single day, every day that kind of like a stress accumulated every single time. And when the kind of like only when that kind of like a stress accumulated, when there is a one situation actually happened, you just blast it out, or kind of like a blunt it out, like kind of like a yelling at somebody or things and that stuff and stuff like that. Okay, yeah. And this will kind of like a spoil the relationship. Or some people kind of like a went into the meditation, but meditation is a kind of like a very little bit of hard practice, because you need to kind of like a master regarding about the breathing practice and things and that. Okay, yeah. So and then kind of like if the people are kind of like a been into the kind of like a simply the kind of like a stress, then they will kind of like a went into the therapy. A therapy is a kind of like a somebody providing such a platform regarding about user, that user kind of like a or whatever the person whatever want to say, they can say anything. Okay, yeah. But kind of like a with the hefty charges and things and that, the therapy is kind of like a work, they will kind of like give you freedom to talk anything that you want, and the therapist who kind of like a listen carefully and give you kind of like a proper advice and things and that. Okay, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing: you are kind of like as a every normal citizen, kind of every normal particular person, where you are from kind of like every part of the planet, kind of like because of we are social animal, we've been through all the things like a career, life, and things and that, and we've been through kind of like a lot of stress. Okay, and because of this stress, we cannot able to be express, because only one way to kind of like express our thoughts by kind of like a writing or kind of like a things and that, but saying something or telling something. But because of this, we don't have any kind of like a particular person who kind of like a supposed to be share kind of like a things besides significant other, no one. Okay, yeah. So because of this thing na, it just kind of like a so much. And another kind of like a sources are actually available, like a therapy and things, but those are kind of like a very expensive. Okay, yeah. So so basically is this thing, Artifact is a kind of like a platform where kind of like a people just kind of like a share. And because of like a like basically I'm kind of like a somebody just try to understand my like try to kind of like experience inside of me. When I kind of like when I kind of like said something, I feel really good. It's a kind of like a thing that na I don't know how I supposed to explain this thing. Okay, have you went to potty? Okay, number two. Obviously, everyone went to number two. Okay, yeah. Okay. So after you went to number two, after you release everything, after you pass out every stool from your body, you feel satisfied. That's something kind of like a get out from your body, right? Like this kind of like a satisfaction that you kind of like a feel after you record Artifact, because it kind of like a feel lighter. It kind of like a feel like that key feel good. It kind of like a feel like that ki you kind of like a mention something and you kind of like a feel really good. And that is a kind of like a really good, like a basically is this thing na ki I don't, maybe I'm not really sure about what this kind of like a therapy work, but for me, Artifact work really well. Okay, because of Artifact, because of I'm kind of like a doing this thing for past 11 year, it kind of like adds so much amount of value inside of me. I don't know, it's a very hard to explain regarding about what kind of like a value it add, but it is like basically is this thing I am believing that what I could able to be do. I am believing I could able to build the Artifact. I am believing I could able to be kind of like a somebody build Adam. I'm believing that I could able to build the kind of like a Gurukul. I believe that I would kind of like a someday will become the filmmaker. And it's not just a belief, I also act on it too. I am building my application. I'm kind of like a talking about the Adam and thinking about every possible scenario, what will gonna happen. Every single stuff I kind of like a talk about this thing that whatever I wanted to become, like the same example. Like why am I kind of like asking this question to myself? So that basically is this thing that I would gonna understand, aware of that. Does it kind of like solve the therapy problem or not, or things like that and that. Because of this Artifact, I'm kind of like a feel like I'm kind of like a something. I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing. Okay, yeah. Because writing a diary is a self-reflection process. So as a recording a diary, it's also self-reflection process too, and it add so much amount of value inside of me. The question is actually pop up again. If the user are kind of like a recording Artifact, does that user require therapy? Well, basically, like it's just my opinion. Okay, because basically is this thing na ki it kind of like I'm saying that ki I'm kind of like giving the answer in probability point of perspective, because in the probability you kind of like give the proper things. Okay, so I might gonna say 80% you might not need a kind of like a therapy if you are kind of like a recording Artifact every single day. 80%. 20% might be kind of like some people will kind of like things and that, but still another thing. There is also another possibility too. Okay, what is actually possibility? Because I am recording Artifact and I'm completely aware of that ki what kind of like a question that I'm asking and things and that. Because it's a kind of like a tool, and how do I supposed to be use that tool to kind of like for my advantage, I will decide that. Okay, yeah. Now basically what is actually happened, some people will kind of like utilize Artifact for very wrong purposes. It's a like, let me tell you one thing. Artifact is a kind of like adding value. It does not know what kind of like a value it add. Example, I am kind of like talking about this question so that I would be aware of that ki when I will kind of like make application, what might gonna happen, things and that. That's why I'm actually asking this question to myself, so that I would be aware of that. Same thing when I kind of like ask question regarding about science, when I ask question regarding about the geography, economics and things and that, I would be more aware of that information much more. Okay, yeah. And when I knew about that information much more, then what will gonna happen? It add value inside of me. But same thing if I kind of like simply talk about something that kind of like simply not right. Example, let's just say I'm kind of like talking about sex, or I'm talking about kind of like something that ki very wrong thing. Then it might gonna kind of like make me a kind of like something that ki like a a raper. Okay, or not kind of like a thing is that kind of like it kind of like it will kind of like make me very bad person. So this is what it is. Like Artifact is a kind of like a things that whatever the person that you are and whatever the kind of like a stuff that you are talking, higher possible chances that you will become that particular person. If you're talk about the physics, you will become physician. If you're talk about if you're talk about the economics, you will become the financial. If you're talking about the kind of like a something app builder, you will kind of like build the application. Okay, yeah. If you're talking about the kind of like a sex, you will kind of like become porn star, or maybe kind of like a rapist or whatnot. So this is what it's a kind of like enhance the kind of like somebody stuff that you are kind of like talking, it became that thing. Okay, now how does it kind of like associate with the kind of like a therapy? Well, imagine as a kind of like somebody Artifact is a kind of like an empty room. Okay, empty room. Okay, now you will decide that how should you supposed to light up that room. Okay, you can add a neon line, you could add red light, you could add a kind of like a multiple kind of like a bulb to kind of like enlight that room much more better, to kind of like the way that you kind of like create the Artifact, the way that you talk. If you talk about something wrong, then that room will kind of like always become darker. Okay, yeah. So basically, this is up to you that how should you supposed to be record the artifact. But still, is this thing that na ki I am kind of like building the application, so it is also my responsibility to kind of like guide those people to kind of like a right direction. Okay, yeah, because I am building the application, so I would be kind of like guide them. And how do I supposed to guide them? By asking question to them. Like basically, I am actually asking this question to myself that it does kind of like somebody the therapy will kind of like a user will kind of like do the therapy or not, or things and that. Same thing I will kind of like ask the question to the user. Okay, how does actually happen? Okay, first of all, when the user kind of like hit the record, they will kind of like simply see the warning screen. In that warning screen, it mentioned do not mention your name and things and that. Keep it kind of like a private, do not mention anything. Okay, yeah. After you click understood, recording start. In the recording, top half screen is a kind of like a showing the prompt. That prompt is a kind of like a say this thing that key, what do you like, beach or mountain? Then basically is this thing that na ki, like when you started recording, you are kind of like a wonder, what do I supposed to be talk? That question is a kind of like a give you direction regarding about that ki, what do you like? Then you might gonna say kind of like a I like beach. Okay, yeah. Then you kind of like explain a little bit that ki, I like beach because of this thing, because of that, because of that. I don't like mountain because of this, because of that, because of that, because of that. Okay, yeah. Like basically because of this question, I'm kind of like giving the direction to the user. Okay, yeah. There are so many kind of like a question actually over there. User can kind of like a somebody whatever the question that kind of like a feels like wanted to talk, click and kind of like a talk. Now because of this question, I kind of like a curated such a question that kind of like add a value to the user. Okay, yeah, to kind of like make the conversation much more kind of like interesting way. They are kind of like love to talk about stuff. So like because of this thing, I'm kind of like guiding people to kind of like record the artifact in right way. Okay, yeah. But still I also kind of like give the opportunity to the user that they will kind of like ask question to themselves. Okay, yeah. Right now I don't really have that feature, but I will gonna implement that key. Kind of like a user will kind of like assembly decide that what kind of like a question that they want. So they will kind of like went into the question bank, they will kind of like select the question, what is the question they wanted to ask, and they will kind of ask those questions to themselves. Like basically user will kind of like decide that if they wanted to kind of like give the answer regarding about that, then yeah, sure. But making sure that question should supposed to be add value in your life, or kind of like a something, not a kind of like a making you something really vulnerable or stupid or stuff like that. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of like a stuff, whatever. The question is kind of like a say this thing, if the user are kind of like a recording artifact, does people require therapy? Well, 80% chances that they don't really require a therapy. Okay, yeah. 20% might. Okay, yeah. Who are those 20% who might need a kind of like a therapy even after they are kind of like a recording artifact? I'm not really sure who are those 20 people. Because let me tell you one thing, na. I have to be it's not like I will not gonna say this thing that ki user will not gonna know, not gonna need the kind of like assembly the therapy and things and that. I will not gonna say confidently. Why? Because I don't know the people. I don't know what kind of like a people will kind of like record the artifact. I don't know what they will kind of like record the artifact and things and that. Okay, so there are kind of like so many stuff. Like artifact is not a kind of like a platform that you are kind of like somebody creating content. No, definitely not. Artifact is not a things that you consider yourself as a kind of like somebody kind of like a creator things. No. Consider yourself that you are talking to yourself. It's a kind of like opportunity that kind of like you are talking to yourself. Like right now I am talking to myself regarding about what exactly I want and things and that. Okay, it add value inside of me. That's why I'm kind of like building this application and things and that. My answer is that it would kind of like assembly 80% of the user doesn't really require the kind of like assembly the therapy. Okay, 80%. 20% I'm not really sure what will gonna happen. All right, this is it. I have to be end here, and thank you.